We are now 24 hours on from the release of the absolutely club-altering news that Lachlan Galvin will not be a West Tiger from 2027 onwards. Now, I've intentionally sort of sat back and watched this story unfold, watch everyone have their opinions, and certainly it's a subject on which a lot of people are divided. And despite all the things that have been said and reported on the topic, I still kind of feel like we don't know why this is all taking place. It has been reported by Michael Shamus of the Sydney Morning Herald that Lachlan Galvin and his team feel that Benji Marshall's coaching won't get Galvin to the potential that they feel he has. That's personally not really an excuse that I buy though, and I'll explain why. The Tigers are legitimately a really exciting club to be at right now. If I were a young player, they would be one of the top teams on my list of clubs that I would want to be at, and Benji Marshall is a significant part of that. I feel as a young coach, obviously last year he struggled, but he still took the Tigers forward in a massive way. It's not reported a lot, but they won a quarter of their games last year under the rookie coaching of Marshall, and they've only gone from strength to strength in this season. He's a coach who's been able to attract the likes of Jerome Luai, Sinia Taruva, and Terrell May to the club as well. And not only that, but he's shown a lot of faith and belief in Galvin throughout his short career, debuting him before he was on the radar of pretty much anyone in the rugby league media, and building an entire game plan around Lachlan Galvin. For anyone that watches my watch-along live streams, whenever the Tigers play, I say they should be giving more ball to Luai, but clearly Benji Marshall has made a decision not to do that. Both him and Api Coruscant recently said it in a post-match press conference, when Lucky wants the ball, he gets it. There's not many other clubs who would do that for a teenage half. It's why when the obvious speculation comes up as to where he's going to end up, and we'll get to that later, the Tigers make more sense than any potential destination in my opinion. They're a club on the up, they absolutely love him as well. And you could make a pretty solid case that he owes them a little bit of loyalty after they took a chance on him when he was discarded by the Parramatta Eels. And I do just want to touch on that for a moment. Owing a club loyalty. Andrew Johns, obviously absolutely synonymous with the Newcastle Knights. When you think of that club, you think of Joey, and the legacy that he left at Newcastle surpasses almost any other player at any other club. Before this announcement, he was outspoken in trying to encourage Galvin to stay at the Tigers, acknowledging the appeal of going and getting more money, going and getting premierships potentially, but highlighting the fact that there is absolutely no value you can put on the love that fans give you when you are loyal to a club and get a team like the Tigers, who haven't made finals in a decade, back to where their fans feel like they should belong. If you're the guy that can do that, that defines your career forever, and let's just say you'll never have to pay for a beer in Campbelltown. To turn away from all of that is a huge decision. Obviously, Galvin's player agent Isaac Moses has managed to convince him, but if I were a player in his position, I would find that dream very, very difficult to turn down, especially given the stage of his career that he's at. I can understand a veteran player playing for a club that's not successful, wanting to go and chase premiership success just before the end of their career, but Galvin's 19 years old. I would absolutely be inclined to stay in an environment in which I am loved, learn my trade even more, and then potentially later in your career, that's when you can go and search for the glory. Either way though, although there are many conflicting reports as to how this all took place, I do want to highlight almost a bit of pride in the way that the West Tigers have handled this, because in the past, the West Tigers would have dragged out this entire thing into a big contract saga. It would have all played out in the media and inevitably ended with the club being pressured into offering the young gun the money that he wanted. I mean, just look at the example of Jaden Sullivan from last year, the amount of money that they offered him to get him to the club, and how much they struggled to offload him. Or you want to go back further than that, Luke Brooks, who was obviously the favourite son of the West Tigers when he first came through into first grade, and ended up being a disaster of a contract. I see it as a positive that despite Galvin's undoubted potential, the Tigers have taken a stance that no one player is bigger than the club and put the club first. It seems to me that the Tigers did right by Galvin at every single juncture. They debuted him early, showed a lot of faith in him, and despite signing Jerome Luai, four-time premiership winning half, they've built their game plan around Galvin. And when all was said and done, they offered him what seems to me to be a really strong contract. I back the Tigers for not being dragged into the negotiation mind games and just saying, okay, cool, we're moving on. In terms of where the Tigers go from here, the obvious answer is young half Latu Fainu, who they signed from the Manly Warringah Seagulls a few years ago. And I do think that if Galvin had extended, Fainu's a player who they almost certainly would have lost, and he is a very talented young half. If he were at essentially any other team, I would have him at almost the top of my Tigers recruitment list for replacing Galvin. Not to mention that Latu's brothers, Sione and Samuela being one of my favorite players in the entire NRL, are both also at the Tigers. So having Latu be a part of their future will increase their chances of keeping hold of the two other brothers, which I think will really strengthen the Tigers moving into the future. All three of them are incredibly talented players, and as good as Galvin is, if the choice was keeping Galvin or keeping all three Fainus, I'm going for the Fainus. The question then becomes, does Latu Fainu now get the 5/8 spot alongside Jerome Luai from now onwards, dropping Lachlan Galvin to reserve grade? Now, I feel like whenever a player does leave a club, there's always this speculation that comes out. There's always the, will he get dropped? Then the will he get immediately released? We sort of just go through this cycle. But I do think in this instance, the argument has quite a bit of merit. I've said it a million times and I'll say it again. If you're not winning a premiership, it doesn't really matter what you're doing. The Tigers could continue to play Lachlan Galvin throughout this year, and they may make the finals, which would be nice for them, but I don't really care if you're finishing 8th or finishing 15th. The history books remember you in the same way. The sole goal of an NRL team is winning a premiership. And as good as I think they are, they're not going to do that this year. It's going to be in coming years where they potentially make an attempt at that goal. Those will be years when Latu Fainu is the 5/8. So if I were in charge of the West Tigers, I'd be inclined to think, well, if Luai and Fainu are my premiership halves that I'm building towards, why not start now? Instead of playing Galvin for the next 2 years and then seeing him go to another club, get Latu 2 years of invaluable experience playing alongside Jerome Luai. I do want to highlight though that Lachlan Galvin hasn't done anything wrong here. I don't feel like he's done the honourable thing, and I do think he does owe some loyalty to the West Tigers, but he hasn't broken any rules. Not that that's going to stop the court of public opinion, but I think it is worth saying. Despite what the Tigers have done for him, Galvin is within his rights to reject the contract offer and seek an opportunity elsewhere. That won't stop Tigers fans though. And while in most instances when a player leaves a club, the reports do come out of, oh, the fans are going to absolutely despise him for the next year, but we never really see that come to fruition. But I kind of think in this instance it might be an exception. Galvin was the Tigers guy. This young, fresh-faced kid, giving a bit of a middle finger to the rest of the league, playing attacking football however he wants to. The Tigers fans loved him, and he really has now turned his back on them. I reckon he could get a frosty reception pretty much every home game he plays from now on. And it's why I do think, despite the Tigers saying they have no intention of releasing him early, next season he'll probably be playing in different colours. Which brings us on to the clubs he could potentially play for. Now, there are two that I want to rule out almost immediately. One is the Sydney Roosters. Now, the Roosters obviously have been linked with Daly Cherry Evans. I do think it's likely that they sign him. I think as long as he continues to play on in the NRL, it will likely be in the eastern suburbs. And certainly the way that that's being discussed in the media is almost as a matter of fact. But here's another fact for you. Sam Walker is their guy. He's the halfback that's locked up there long term. And him next to Lachlan Galvin would be a nightmare. Both of them are incredibly off-the-cuff, ball-dominant young firebrands. There is no way that they'll be able to work together. And with both Sanders Smith and Hugo Savala getting game time this season, I think the Roosters will lean in the direction of one of those two to be Sam Walker's long-term halves partner. Club number 2 I'm ruling out is the Bulldogs. Now, Phil Gould has been a long admirer of Lachlan Galvin, describing him as the best young kid he's ever seen come through, and saying that the team that has Lachlan Galvin in the future will be winning premierships. Now that is very high praise, and on face value it makes it seem like the Bulldogs will go and make a play at him, but I just can't see where he fits into their long-term plan. Matt Burton at halfback is an experiment that was tried and unfortunately has failed. You couldn't play Galvin at halfback either. I just really struggle to see where Galvin fits in. Matt Burton is a very capable centre, but both Stephen Crichton and Bronson Xerri are there and are very talented players in their own right. So I just don't think that it's realistic that they will make a play at Lachie. Getting into the clubs that would work though, and this is the one that I think is almost most likely, I've gone with the South Sydney Rabbitohs. You got to remember with South that we're talking about a move that will either happen next year or the year after, and their 5'8" Cody Walker is not getting any younger. The Rabbitohs have found their long-term halfback in Jamie Humphries. Since coming into first grade this year, he has been absolutely outstanding. And I do think him and Lachlan Galvin in the halves would work really well together. Two very young players who have the opportunity to build a combination long-term and take that club back up to the top of the NRL. They're a very big club, they're Sydney-based, and there's potentially a spot there for him. I think that's an option that makes a lot of sense. Another Sydney club that would make sense for him is the Parramatta Eels. As long as there's not a grudge held by him for the fact that they released him when he was younger, there's a lot of reasons why the Eels make sense. They do have the money to spend after losing 5'8" Dylan Brown, and so obviously want to sign a 5'8" replacement. Not to mention the fact that Galvin's manager, Isaac Moses, is the cousin of Parramatta captain Mitchell Moses. Lachie was a Parramatta fan growing up, almost certainly has ideals of playing for that club, and what I mentioned earlier about getting the Tigers back to where they belong, that kind of legacy also has the same appeal at Parramatta. It'd be a hell of a middle finger to the Tigers if he went to the club that the Tigers rescued him from, but nonetheless, rugby league is a business and it's an option that I could definitely see happening. Why you would want to leave the West Tigers, a club I perceive to be on the up, for the Parramatta Eels, a club I perceive to be still struggling throughout the rest of this season, I'm not too sure, but nonetheless, here we are. Moving on, another option could definitely be the Penrith Panthers, who have struggled to find a replacement 5'8" for, ironically, Jerome Luai. The Panthers will not have anything like the money to offer that the Tigers did or clubs like Parramatta will, but they do have the appeal of Galvin joining a successful organisation, a really strong system, and playing alongside the greatest halfback in the world. I would almost say it's commendable if Galvin ended up there because he would have to be on such significant unders, but it is a system that would definitely be able to develop his potential, so if that was the concern at the Tigers, it would prove a good remedy. Penrith have definitely started this season with some problems, but I do think that they'll overcome them before the end of the year, and signing a guy like Galvin, potentially having him play at 5'8" next season, that goes a long way to getting them back towards where they were. And speaking of systems that would develop him really well, the last option that I've got is the Melbourne Storm. Now this one is a little bit more left field because there's absolutely zero chance that they push Cameron Munster out of the club any earlier than he wants to. If Galvin's making a move for next season, then I think Melbourne are pretty much off the table. But if it is just for 2027, there could well be an appeal for Cameron Munster to potentially get a contract offer back up in Queensland. Munster is signed until the end of 2027, but there are reports that have been going around for years now about a potential desire to return home. Take the Dolphins, for example. If he could play the role of the experienced 5'8" next to Isaiah Katoa, that would make a lot of sense and open up the opportunity for the Storm to pursue Galvin. Obviously, it is all just speculation at this point, but that is kind of the fun of transfer sagas in the NRL. I think the story should be here that while Galvin and his team haven't done the right thing by the Tigers, they've done what seems to make sense for them. And I think the Tigers as well have done what seems right for them in not pushing higher and higher offers to Galvin and his team. Regardless, I'm absolutely fascinated to see how this does play out, and whatever team picks up Galvin will have a hell of a half on their hands.